For years, Lavra Ingraham was one of the most recognizable faces on American cable news. Night after night, her voice dominated primetime, shaping political debate and drawing millions of loyal viewers. To supporters, she was fearless and unfiltered. To critics, she was controversial and polarizing. But then, something shifted. Quietly at first, then impossible to ignore. Viewers began noticing subtle changes. Extended absences. Fewer headline-making moments. A tone that seemed different from the sharp, relentless presence that once defined her show. Online speculation grew louder, fueled by rumors, assumptions, and half-told narratives that spread faster than facts. Some claimed she was being pushed out. Others suggested internal conflicts, burnout, or behind-the-scenes pressure. What made the situation even more confusing was the lack of a clear explanation. No dramatic farewell. No official announcement signaling a major exit. Instead, there was silence, and silence in media culture often invites the most extreme theories. Behind that silence, however, lies a far more complex story. One shaped by public backlash, shifting media priorities, personal decisions, and the evolving expectations placed on high-profile television figures. Lavra Ingraham's journey didn't end suddenly. It transformed, piece by piece, under intense scrutiny. So what really happened? Was it controversy catching up with her, a strategic retreat, or something far more personal? To understand the truth, we have to look beyond headlines and rumors, and trace the moments that slowly changed everything, long before questions began swirling about her future. Lavra Ingraham had already built one of the most influential careers in modern American media. Her rise wasn't accidental, nor was it sudden. It was the result of decades spent positioning herself as a sharp, disciplined communicator who understood both politics and television better than most. Ingraham's background set her apart early. With formal training, legal education, and experience in political commentary, she entered media with credibility that extended beyond sound bites. Over time, she cultivated a persona that blended authority with confidence, allowing her to speak not just to viewers but for them. That connection became her greatest strength. When she secured a primetime slot on Fox News, the impact was immediate. Ratings surged. Her program became a nightly destination for audiences who felt unheard elsewhere. She wasn't just delivering commentary, she was shaping narratives, driving conversations, and influencing how millions interpreted current events. Primetime amplified everything. Praise grew louder. Criticism became sharper. Every word was dissected, replayed, and debated across social media and competing networks. With that level of exposure came extraordinary power and extraordinary pressure. Inside the network, Ingraham was viewed as a dependable anchor of the lineup. She delivered consistent viewership, loyalty, and engagement. That kind of reliability is rare in television, and it made her presence seem permanent. To many viewers, it felt unimaginable that Fox News primetime could exist without her voice. But success at that level also brings constant scrutiny. Every broadcast carried risk. A single statement could ignite backlash or dominate headlines for days. The margin for error narrowed as her influence expanded. Supporters expected boldness. Critics waited for missteps. There was little room left for neutrality or silence. As the media landscape evolved, expectations shifted. Cable news faced growing competition from digital platforms, independent commentators, and social media personalities. Networks adjusted strategies. Messaging tightened. The pressure to maintain relevance intensified. Ingraham remained a powerful figure, but the environment around her was changing. What once felt stable began to feel volatile. Ratings were no longer the only metric. Public reaction, advertiser sensitivity, and cultural momentum started playing larger roles behind the scenes. At the same time, the personal cost of constant exposure grew heavier. Being a nightly target, praised by some, criticized by others, creates a psychological toll that rarely appears on camera. Longtime media figures often describe this phase as exhausting. Even when success continues, from the outside, everything still looked intact. The show aired. The audience watched. The brand remained strong. Yet subtle signs suggested the pace was becoming harder to sustain indefinitely. The truth is, careers at the top don't usually collapse overnight. They shift gradually, influenced by forces both visible and hidden. For Lavra Ingraham, The foundation was still there, but the conditions that built it were beginning to change. Understanding what happened next requires looking beyond ratings, charts, and headlines. It means examining how controversy, culture, and internal pressures slowly converged, setting the stage for a transformation that few initially recognized. As Laura Ingraham's influence grew, so did the intensity of public reaction to her words. What once passed as provocative commentary increasingly became headline-making controversy. In a media climate that was growing less forgiving and more reactive, even long-established figures found themselves navigating unfamiliar territory. Several on-air moments triggered waves of criticism that extended far beyond Fox News' usual audience. Clips circulated rapidly online, stripped of context and amplified by outrage cycles that moved faster than any traditional response could. For the first time, the conversation wasn't just about her opinions. It was about whether those opinions still fit the network's broader strategy. Advertisers began paying closer attention. Corporate caution became a major factor behind the scenes. While Fox News had weathered criticism before, the cost of controversy was rising. Brands grew more sensitive to public perception, and every high-profile backlash carried financial implications. Internally, this created tension. On one hand, Ingraham remained a ratings draw with a fiercely loyal base. On the other, network leadership faced increasing pressure to balance loyalty with risk management. The question wasn't whether she was valuable, it was how much volatility the network was willing to absorb. These moments marked a subtle but important shift. Coverage became more measured. Appearances outside her own program were less frequent. Extended breaks, once rare, became more noticeable. To viewers, these changes felt unexplained. To insiders, they reflected strategic caution. At the same time, public expectations were evolving. Audiences demanded accountability and restraint in ways that hadn't existed during the early years of cable news dominance. What once felt like fearless commentary now landed differently in a culture shaped by constant feedback and instant backlash. This wasn't unique to Ingraham. Across the industry, long-standing personalities were reassessing their approach or being reassessed by the networks that employed them. Longevity no longer guaranteed stability. Adaptability became essential. For Ingraham, the pressure was layered. Every broadcast carried not just editorial weight, but reputational risk for the network as a whole. Mistakes, real or perceived, became harder to contain. Silence, once a protective shield, now felt like avoidance. Viewers sensed the shift even if they couldn't name it. The tone of speculation changed from admiration to uncertainty. Online forums filled with questions. Was she stepping back voluntarily? Was the network repositioning her role? Or was something more personal unfolding? What made this period especially confusing was the absence of clear communication. No definitive statements clarified her status. The lack of transparency allowed rumor to flourish, often overshadowing reality. Behind the scenes, these turning points rarely come with dramatic announcements. They unfold through meetings, evaluations, and quiet decisions designed to avoid disruption. For a figure as prominent as Laura Ingraham, any transition would inevitably be handled with extreme caution. This phase didn't signal an immediate end, but it did mark the beginning of change. The stability of primetime had been replaced by uncertainty. The path forward was no longer automatic. To understand where that path led, we have to look beyond controversy alone and consider how personal priorities and long-term sustainability began reshaping the choices ahead. As the noise surrounding Laura Ingraham intensified, a more subtle transformation was unfolding away from the spotlight. While public debate focused on controversy and ratings, the deeper story involved personal choices and a reassessment of what long-term visibility actually costs. For someone who had spent years at the center of national attention, the constant pressure was no longer just professional, it was personal. Longtime media figures often reach a point where influence no longer feels empowering but consuming. Ingraham had already achieved what many in broadcasting never do: sustained relevance, a loyal audience, and a secure place in primetime history. With those milestones met, the question shifted from "what's next?" to "at what cost?" Extended breaks from the screen became more noticeable. Rather than dramatic announcements, these pauses appeared quietly, fueling speculation while allowing breathing room. To viewers, they looked like absence. In reality, they reflected recalibration. There were also growing signs of selectivity. Fewer public appearances. Less participation in broader network programming. The energy once devoted to constant engagement seemed redirected toward preservation and control. This wasn't withdrawal, it was restraint. Behind the scenes, this kind of shift is rarely framed as defeat. It's survival. High-profile commentators operate under relentless scrutiny, where every word can ignite backlash within minutes. Over time, even the most resilient personalities recognize the value of stepping back without stepping away. Ingraham's presence remained, but it was less omnipresent. The tone of her appearances appeared more deliberate, less reactive. This change didn't signal weakness. It suggested strategy. Longevity in media often depends on knowing when to reduce exposure rather than amplify it. The personal toll of public life also became harder to ignore. Years of constant criticism, misinterpretation, and digital hostility can reshape priorities. Privacy becomes more valuable. Peace outweighs prominence. Observers who expected a dramatic exit misunderstood how careers at this level actually evolve. Rarely do they end with a closing monologue or farewell broadcast. More often, they fade into something quieter, controlled, and intentional. This quieter presence confused critics and supporters alike. Without clear statements, people filled the gaps with assumptions. But silence doesn't always mean instability. Sometimes it reflects clarity. Ingraham's situation highlights a broader truth about modern media. Visibility is no longer synonymous with influence. Stepping back doesn't erase relevance, it can preserve it. What emerged during this period wasn't disappearance, but transformation. A recalibrated role that favored sustainability over saturation. Less exposure, more control. To understand where this path ultimately leads, we need to look at how legacy, public perception, and the future of media converge, and what that means for someone who once defined primetime. As the public conversation around Lavra Ingraham gradually softened, a clearer picture began to form. What once felt like disappearance now looks more like evolution. Her role in the media landscape didn't end abruptly. It shifted in response to changing times, expectations, and personal priorities. In an era where outrage cycles dominate attention, maintaining a constant presence can be more damaging than stepping back. For longtime broadcasters, legacy becomes a consideration that outweighs daily visibility. Ingraham's quieter profile reflects an understanding that influence doesn't always require saturation. Public perception, however, remains divided. Supporters continue to see her as a defining voice who challenged mainstream narratives. Critics view her career as emblematic of a media style increasingly at odds with modern sensibilities. Both views coexist, shaping a legacy that is complex rather than simple. What's important is that her absence from the spotlight doesn't signal irrelevance. Media careers at this level rarely vanish, they consolidate. Influence becomes selective. Appearances become intentional. Control replaces constant exposure. Fox News itself has undergone shifts, adapting to audience fragmentation and digital competition. Primetime dominance no longer guarantees permanence. Networks now prioritize flexibility over familiarity, and even the most established figures must adapt. Ingraham's single quotes journey reflects that reality. She didn't vanish under pressure, nor was she abruptly removed. Instead, she navigated a transition shaped by public reaction, internal strategy, and personal boundaries. This evolution also challenges how audiences interpret media narratives. The absence of dramatic exits invites speculation, but often obscures the quieter truth. Longevity in broadcasting requires reinvention. Looking back, her impact on cable news is undeniable. She helped define an era where opinion-driven programming reshaped how audiences consumed information. Whether admired or criticized, her presence influenced national conversation in lasting ways. As of now, Lavra Ingraham remains a recognizable figure even with reduced visibility. Her story serves as a reminder that careers at the top don't always end with collapse. Sometimes they conclude with recalibration. The real lesson isn't about controversy or silence. It's about how public figures respond when the environment around them changes. Stepping back can be an act of control, not defeat. In the end, what really happened wasn't disappearance, it was transition. A shift away from constant exposure toward a more deliberate presence. And in today's media landscape, that may be the most strategic move of all.